China's economy has grown faster than expected, expanding by 5.4% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2025. But this comes as Beijing, in fact, faces mounting pressure in a heated trade war with the United States. Now, the US under President Trump has slapped a massive 245% tariff on all Chinese imports just hours ago. It's a direct response to what the White House calls unfair retaliation by Beijing. The White House has further said that China must make the first move if it wants a deal. In fact, Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt quoted President Trump directly saying, "The ball is in China's court. We don't need a deal. They do." On the other hand, China has hit back, urging Washington to stop exerting what it calls maximum pressure and return to dialogue if it truly desires a resolution. The world's second largest economy is now bracing for the full impact of these renewed 245% tariffs, even as it struggles to maintain momentum. Now, listening to what the Chinese National Bureau of Statistics had to say earlier in the day, and where does the White House, in fact, stand on the issue?
从短期来看呢，就是美国加征高额关税会对我们国家的这个外贸和经济带来一定的压力，但是改变不了中国经济持续长期向好的大势。中国经济基础稳，韧性强，潜力大，所以我们有底气、有能力、有信心应对外部挑战，实现既定发展目标。
Look, the president has made his position on China quite clear, although I do have an additional statement that he just shared with me in the Oval Office. The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put it another way, they need our money. So the president, again, has made it quite clear that he's open to a deal with China, but China needs to make a deal with the United States of America.
Well, my colleague Gauri Dwivedi now joins us for the latest on this. Gauri, you heard both the statements. Washington saying the ball is in China's court versus Beijing saying it's maximum pressure. So it seems like a game of all brakes and no gas right now. What can we expect, Gauri?
We can expect more tensions between China and US going forward. It clearly looks like both sides are waiting for the other party to now blink first. As far as these Chinese economic parameters are concerned, one needs to keep in mind this is January to March. This is before the Trump tariffs kicked in. So before any of the trade tensions, the trade uncertainty kicked in, these are those set of numbers. Of course, they indicate that the Chinese economy has done better than several years. In fact, the manufacturing numbers are the highest in the last 5 years. So indicates that the entire COVID, post-COVID lockdown, all of that economic distress, the Chinese economy has recovered from it till March. But now you have fresh trade tensions that are likely to have an impact on the overall economic forecast for China for this year, something that brokerages around the world are already reflecting. They are saying that Chinese government's expectation and target of a 5% growth for this year will not be met. In fact, some have even downgraded it to less than 3.5%, indicating that these trade tensions will have a very large impact on China's manufacturing setup. And that will mean that these trade tensions are only set to increase from here on. And the message that the Trump administration is giving is that it's not going to bow down to the Chinese mechanism, so to say, and it will not bow down to any of the tactics, which is that even if there is a strong messaging coming in from China, Donald Trump is not going to relent, which means that if these tariffs remain the way they are, even the 3.5% growth target that some brokerages have brought down China's economy target to may be very difficult. Bottom line to this really is that the manufacturing overall ecosystem for China is under tremendous pressure. The numbers look rosy because they were before the Trump tariffs kicked in April. My sense is the next 2 quarters would see a lot of back and forth before the two sides finally get onto the table and decide what would be the way forward.
The next 2 quarters will be crucial for China, says Executive Editor Gauri Dwivedi. Thank you so much for that, Gauri. Moving on and staying with China, in fact, the country has issued over 85,000 visas to Indian citizens. Now, this is between the 1st of January and the 9th of April only this year, signaling a thaw in people-to-people ties, in fact. Now, the Chinese ambassador to India also, in fact, invited more Indians to visit, calling China open, safe and friendly. The move comes amid rising global trade tensions, especially with the US President Donald Trump having threatened new tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, in response, China has urged India to stand against what it calls US tariff abuse, adding a diplomatic edge to an otherwise soft power move. When the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff are set to visit Paris this week for key talks on Ukraine, Iran and even the ongoing trade war. Now, Witkoff will meet French President Emmanuel Macron while Rubio speaks with his French counterpart Jean-Noël Barrot. Now, the visit comes shortly after Witkoff met Russian President Putin in Moscow. It was part of a slow-moving push for, in fact, a ceasefire in Ukraine. Macron, meanwhile, is rallying European support for Kiev, including the idea of a reassurance force if fighting indeed does stop. Trade tensions, meanwhile, are also expected to feature in the talks as Trump's recent tariff suspension faces skepticism from Paris. Donald Trump threatened to eliminate Harvard University's tax-exempt status following the Ivy League school's refusal to implement policy changes demanded by his administration this week. Now, basically, all major colleges and universities across the U.S. are tax-exempt organizations, and the government revoking that status over policy disagreements would be unprecedented. Like many other Trump decisions this term, the U.S. tax code, meanwhile, also grants exemptions to a wide swathe, in fact, of organizations including charities, religious institutions, and even some political organizations. But Republicans, well, they've taken aim at the Ivy League through the tax code in the past. Congress imposed a 1.4% tax on high-dollar university endowments like Harvard's, in fact, in 2017, and Republicans may expand the levy in the tax package they are currently assembling. Listen in.
I believe the possibility of removing tax-exempt status. How serious is that threat, and are there other universities he's considering?
First, when it comes to Harvard, as I said, the president has been quite clear they must follow federal law. He also wants to see Harvard apologize, and Harvard should apologize for the egregious anti-Semitism that took place on their college campus against Jewish American students.
Staying with the U.S., President Donald Trump is now proposing a controversial self-deportation program offering financial incentives for undocumented immigrants to leave the U.S. voluntarily. Now, in a Fox Noticias interview, Trump said stipends and plane tickets would be provided with a chance to re-enter legally in the future. The White House, meanwhile, offered no further comments. Now, Trump, who's vowed mass deportations in his second term, is now urging immigrants to initiate their own departure through a government app. His latest policy comes as immigration remains a top election issue and follows a broader crackdown on illegal entry and overstays. And the Trump administration has proposed eliminating U.S. funding for United Nations peacekeeping missions, citing failures in Mali, Lebanon, and even Congo. The U.S. currently contributes over a quarter of the UN's peacekeeping budget. Now, the proposal is part of a larger plan, in fact, to slash the State Department's budget by half or 50%. For this, Congress must approve the plan, and lawmakers are expected to push back. Meanwhile, UNICEF has said it in fact expects a 20% cut in its 2026 budget. Now, this after the U.S. slashed humanitarian aid under President Trump's America First initiative. The agency had nearly $9 billion in 2024, but now anticipates steep drops, citing a global funding crisis. The U.S. has historically been UNICEF's largest donor, contributing over $800 million only last year. Trump's broader aid review has already forced major cutbacks across UN agencies. With staff layoffs and program reductions looming, UNICEF has said that it's reassessing operations to protect what matters the most: child survival and well-being. The US military is reportedly preparing to have its presence in Syria. Yes, that's correct. About 2,000 troops are currently in the country, assisting Kurdish forces against any ISIS resurgence. The move comes as the Trump administration balances negotiations with Iran and also increases its military posture across West Asia. A federal judge has sharply criticized Trump administration officials for failing to act on a Supreme Court order to bring back a Salvadorian man deported last month. 29-year-old Kilmar Abrego Garcia was in fact sent to a mega prison in El Salvador despite legal protections that should have in fact kept him in the US. Now the judge, Paula Sinis, has said, and I quote here, "Nothing has been done," and gave the government 2 weeks to show concrete steps. While the Supreme Court has said that the US must facilitate his return, the Department of Homeland Security now says that the man Garcia, who hails from Maryland, will be detained if he tries to re-enter the country. The Team Trump defends the deportation, citing alleged gang MS-13 ties, which his family vehemently deny. The European Union's long-delayed roadmap to end oil and gas imports from Russia will finally be released on the 6th of May. Now, the plan, originally due last month, outlines how the bloc intends to quit Russian fossil fuels entirely by 2027. But the path won't be easy. 19% of EU's gas supply still comes from Russia, and in fact, it came last year. Now, this mostly as liquefied natural gas. Hungary is blocking sanctions, and there's growing debate, in fact, on whether to impose tariffs. Meanwhile, the US is emerging as a key alternative supplier. However, concerns remain as President Trump may use gas exports as leverage in future EU-US trade talks. The top advisor of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was escorted from the Pentagon on Tuesday as part of an investigation into an unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. Now, this is as per reports. Dan Caldwell, who was identified as part of an ongoing leak investigation, was placed on administrative leave since arriving at the Pentagon with Hegseth in January. Now, Caldwell has accompanied the Defense Secretary to some of his meetings with key foreign leaders. In a signal text chain, in fact, first disclosed by the Atlantic last month, Caldwell was also listed as Hegseth's representative to the White House. This as it prepared to launch strikes in Yemen. He also advised Hegseth on other key matters related to US military operations around the world. Four people have been injured in a shooting at Wilmer Hutchins High School in Dallas. Authorities have said that 3 of the victims, aged between 15 and 18 years of age, were shot but are expected to recover. A student suspect, meanwhile, has been identified but remains at large. The school was quickly secured and students were reunited with families at a nearby stadium. Meanwhile, classes have been cancelled for the rest of the week, with mental health services being offered. This incident marks the second such shooting at the same school in just over 1 year. Listen in.
It remains a fluid investigation, and all of our law enforcement partners are helping us to work on this investigation. We had 4 students injured today and were transported to area hospitals. The suspect has not been arrested, but we have identified the suspect, and as I mentioned, we have many of our law enforcement partners helping us, and we are working on locating and arresting the suspect at this time.
According to a Guardian report, Britain's Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds is expected to visit China later this year to revive trade talks and restart the UK-China Joint Economic Commission. Now, since Labour came to power in 2024, that's last year, the UK has cautiously re-engaged with Beijing, its 5th largest trading partner, despite ongoing concerns over security and human rights. Now, Reynolds recently said Chinese firms are no longer welcome in the UK steel sector but he left room for cooperation in areas like car manufacturing, life sciences, and even agriculture. The UK Supreme Court is set to rule today on whether the term woman under the Equality Act includes transgender women with legal gender recognition certificates. Now, this ruling could have wide-ranging implications for trans rights, particularly regarding access to women-only spaces and public roles. The case was brought by campaigners who say only biological women should be covered, while the Scottish government argues, in fact, that legal recognition should be provided with full protection. Hamas is said to have rejected an Israeli proposal for a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza, which called for the armed group to give up all its weapons. A senior Palestinian official familiar with the talks said the plan gave no commitment to end the war or for an Israeli troop pullout. Key militant group Hamas demands in exchange for releasing half of the living hostages which it holds. Now, this comes as Israel continues its military offensive in the besieged enclave. The Hong Kong Post has halted sea mail and will soon stop air mail for goods sent to the US, citing Washington's bullying tariffs. The agency criticized America's decision to scrap the de minimis exemption and raise fees on imported goods starting the 2nd of May. It said it will not act as a tax collector for America. Now, the move comes as Hong Kong continues to face US trade restrictions after losing its special status under American law.